Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another Zoom edition of Tiger Sidelines. Alongside Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter, I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks, as always, for joining us. Today, we'll talk a little bit of football. That'll be a little bit later on, but let's start on the hardwood as we get with the Missouri basketball team losing 86-80 at home to LSU in a game that doesn't necessarily mean much, but Dave, it's not necessarily the way you want to finish the regular season either.
No, I think people would feel a lot better if the last two results were flip-flop, just as far as the timing goes. You impressive win at Florida, dramatic finish, and then it's kind of a buzzkill moment at the end when you can't hold off LSU, which is a better team than Florida and frankly better than Missouri. And just to end it like that, and that you get a little bit of a pause before you go into the postseason tournament. You always want to end on a good note, just as far as momentum and just getting the good vibes back from the fan base. So I understand why people maybe aren't as excited about this team when you finish like that.
You know, it was interesting. We mentioned it here last week. It's dangerous to have senior day activities after the game. That's because of a loss. That's what happened, Gabe.
Yeah, and I wasn't at the game. I didn't even see the senior day stuff. I don't know what they did for it, to be quite honest with you. Nobody wanted to talk about that afterwards, obviously. Maybe senior day would have gone better if, like Dave said, if the results were switched. What if the payrolls were switched on Saturday? Because, it simply amazes me that we can get through 2 hours of a basketball game that LSU plays and pretend that the whole thing just doesn't exist. To me, it's dishonest coverage of the sport, if that's not the first thing you talk about every time you talk about LSU.
So let's not talk much about that game, but Gabe, I'll go back to you. This is a team that was 13-3 in Missouri, and they ended up 15-8. They stumbled down the stretch. They did get that good win at Florida, but really in the final stretch, ever since Jeremiah Tillman took the personal pause, this team has been flailing a bit.
Well, and the weird thing is, if you looked at their schedule, you thought the first half was the tougher half, right? I would have thought, yeah, they might start 7-5, but they could end 8-2, something like that. And it ended up being the reverse. And like Dave said, I understand why people are down a little bit, but we were talking earlier this week. If you just say they lose to Illinois and Oregon, which we thought would happen probably, right? And they trade that for wins over Mississippi State and Georgia. They actually go from the 7 seed to the 4 seed in the SEC tournament. Even better if they get those two games against A&M and Vandy. The record is exactly the same, but actually the season's worse. And we tend to focus on, it's like if you took a test and somebody said, well, I mean, you had a 96, but then you missed 3 of the last 4 questions and you only got a 92. Well, who cares? You got a 92. It doesn't matter what the order of the questions was. And I understand momentum and all that, but I'm not sure it ever really matters, honestly. I mean, we see teams that are playing really well go lose their first game all the time. So I think that's overrated. You have to look at the entire season. The first half of the year doesn't get invalidated because of the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, no doubt. And Dave, I guess that leads to this question. Can this team flip a switch as they go into postseason play?
Yeah, I think so for sure. And I'd put more emphasis on the NCAA tournament for sure. I mean, you go down to Nashville, if you get to the championship game and if you win it, great, you can put a banner up and no one can ever take that away from you. But this is all about, in today's sport, it's all about the NCAA tournament. And, I give them a better chance at maybe winning a game or making a bit of a run maybe in the big tournament than the SEC because they're going to be facing opponents that are less familiar with their personnel, with their style of play. And, certain matchups with the Jeremiah Tillman, you can dominate. And maybe in the SEC where teams have a book on him, like LSU did on Saturday when they just threw 3 guys at him every time he, was in arm's reach of the ball, that matchup is neutralized to some degree. So, yeah, it's all going to be about how far they go. I still think I agree with Gabe. This is a successful season for Missouri. They outperformed the expectations by all accounts. They of the top 7 teams they played this year, they beat 6 of them. They only lost is to LSU. Yes, they lost to Arkansas and Tennessee, but they also beat those teams, and they beat Alabama, and they beat Illinois, and they beat Oregon, and you can't take away what they did in the non-conference. So that's still this team, even though that was back in December. in January. That is still what this team is, what they'll be remembered for. Now they just got to finish strong, and it'll be up to everyone to define what strong is. But I do think you got to win a game in the NCAA tournament to feel good about this season and that the program is making progress.
And all of a sudden, Gabe, if this team wins a game in the SEC tournament, let's say gets to the semifinals there, and then does win, let's say even 2 games in the NCAA tournament, that changes everybody's perspective around.
Right. I mean, so much of this is still to be written, because the truth is, and college basketball fans, and look, I grew up one. I mean, I used to watch games 6 days a week. College basketball fans hate to hear this. This is now a 3-week sport. Yeah. This is a niche sport. Nobody cares about the first 4 months other than the diehards. I mean, people will, I always say, a lot of Missouri fans would put the 2002 season among the best seasons in school history because Missouri made the Elite Eight. It was awful. They went from top 5 with legitimate top 5 talent to the last team in the field. That was a disastrous regular season, and they won 3 games at the right time. And that's what college basketball is, for better or for worse. If you just get hot for 2 weeks, people will look at the season completely differently. I mean, you remember the 8 seed Kentucky team that went to the Final Four? I mean, people hated that team up until the tournament. So yeah, they can change the way everybody thinks about this team. I don't like it. It shouldn't be that way, but that's what the sport's become.
That's a very good point. And Dave, what does this team need to do in Nashville? Last week, Gabe said it was just stay healthy. Don't get COVID. Yeah. Doesn't matter really what you do there. I mean, this team is the 7th seed in the SEC tournament. They're really on that 6, 7, 8 line, if you ask me, for the NCAA tournament. And unless they make a run to the finals, I don't think a lot of that is going to change.
Yeah, win Thursday. And then I think, and of course, we don't know this for sure, but if you win Thursday, you could probably avoid the 8-9 game, because you're not going to get punished by losing to Arkansas, who right now is playing for a 2 seed. So you're not going to get dropped by losing to the Hogs. But you may not move anywhere if you lose to Georgia again. So I think you got to get a win. And from there, just stay healthy, stay in your room as much as you can, which is what they're going to have to do anyway. Don't have anybody in the traveling party test positive between the time they show up in Nashville to the minute they leave, and then have to get ready to go to Indiana. So yeah. And then I think beyond the Arkansas game, anything you do is gravy at this point. I think if anything, try to avoid Ole Miss. Ole Miss will have to beat South Carolina and have to beat LSU, but that's the one team that I would not want to face if I'm Missouri, just because that program has Missouri's number. It doesn't matter who the players are, who the coaches are.
No doubt about it. And I think Gabe, Conzo Martin is probably pretty relaxed going into these next 2 weeks, don't you think?
I mean, he's in the tournament and he's going to be seeded to win a game. I think the Georgia game is important. You want to win that because, look, Georgia's bad and they already beat you once. But beyond that, you don't want to go in having lost 6 of 8, a lot of them to bad teams. So win that game. If you lose to Arkansas, it doesn't matter. And I've said all year, the bar for me is just win a game in March. Guys, it's been 11 years. I mean, that is – I haven't done an exhaustive study of which Power 5 teams have gone longer, but there probably aren't a ton of them.
Yeah, and that is hard to believe that it has been 11 years for Missouri, who, used to be in the tournament every year. And now we've gotten to the point where we celebrate years where they make it.
And it's not even just making it. I mean, I think they've lost 5 straight tournament games. You go back to the whatever the loss was the year they won a game, and then Frank Haith lost a game to, I think it was to Colorado State. We all know the Norfolk game. They lost the Florida State game. So and honestly, a lot of those games haven't even been very close.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The women's basketball team went to the SEC tournament, lost to Alabama in the opening round, 82-74. It was the same song and dance for Robin Pinchton's team. Close but no cigar, couldn't close it out. And the Mizzou finishes the regular season 5-9 in the SEC, 9-11 overall. Their net ranking is great, but with a 9-11 record, they're not making the NCAA tournament. and she's talked about how they hope to get an invite to the WNIT. And I think that if that happens, they'll go from there, Dave.
Yeah, that has to be best case scenario at this point. I mean, that net ranking is great, but they are under 500. They don't really have a signature win out there at all. They needed to win a few in Greenville to be even in the hunt seriously for an at-large. And you can't blame Asia Blackwell. I mean, she went out in style as far as the tournament goes. 28 points, career high. I watched most of that second half, and she was a beast in there and doing everything she could to propel that team a round further, but they just couldn't get it done. And that's been the story of this team. So, if you're another team out there that's on the bubble, you wouldn't feel great about seeing a sub 500 Missouri team make it. So it's probably best if they go to the WNIT, that's where this team should be.
And as we've documented before, Gabe, this is a couple of years in a row now that's been tough sledding for that program. And so now, after this year, whether they get into the WNIT or not, it's time for a deep dive on this program. And kind of the pieces are there, they think. Now they got to take that next step. And next year, to me, is going to be huge.
Yeah, next year's the year it has to show up on the court, because you've got Frank and Blackwell that are juniors, and you can count on or maybe sophomores again, I guess. You can count on in women's basketball, those players actually are probably coming back, as opposed to maybe on the men's side of things. I don't know, how many of their transfers are leaving. I tend to give most programs a pass in this weird year, especially Robin trying to bring in a whole bunch of new faces. This was a weird season, but next year you've got those two players in that great recruiting class as juniors. It's time. I mean, it needs to be an NCAA tournament season. I'm not saying she's going to lose her job if it's not, but I think people who haven't already maybe done so will lose a little faith in that program.
You feel the same way, Dave, that next year is time to get to the big dance?
Well, yeah, because the job just gets a lot harder if you don't, and getting top flight recruits in gets harder if you're not playing relevant games this time of year, and the sales pitch goes a little stale. The Sophie years get further and further away. So yeah, I think it'll be really critical. This team, and probably more than the men team, not probably, definitely. The home crowds have been a big asset for this program. They definitely were during the Sophie year. So not to make an excuse, but they didn't have that advantage this year. Actually, I think they won more SEC road games than home games. And something that's just the luck of the draw with scheduling and what games they were able to play. So maybe getting back to a normal year, those young players being a year older, they do have a 4-star player coming in, I think from Arizona for next year that maybe can be an impact player. You never know with Robin and transfers. It seems like she is always able to go out and find a few. The flip side, you don't know who's going to leave too, because that's how college basketball works now. So again, a really pivotal year for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We'll see if they get that invite to the WNIT. Okay, time for us to take a break. When we come back, we'll check the tweets that you've sent in, or one of you sent in. We'll have that, and then we'll talk football. You're watching Tiger Sidelines right here on MC22. Welcome back, everybody. This is Tiger Sidelines. Dave Matter, Gabe DeArmond, and I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks as always for joining us. We're at Tiger Sidelines on Twitter, where Joe found us, and he wants to know, does Missouri men's basketball have any big man replacements for Tilly coming in next year or the years after?
Well, I wasn't paying enough attention to remember the tweeter's name, but he may not be quite as hyped for the Jordan Wilmore era as some are. So there's that.
He is tall. I mean, Jordan is
actually
tall.
They do have a freshman though. Yaya Keita is coming in from St. Louis. Now, he tore his ACL in October, but I would think he should be fine by the start of next season. I don't think he's going to step in and replace Jeremiah's numbers day one, but he's kind of the next guy.
Yeah, I think he has started practicing, and I heard Gonzo say recently they fully expect him to be recovered by the time he gets to practice. But yeah, I mean, he's a freshman. He's not going to average 13 and 8 like Jeremiah has this year. I do think, they're going to explore the transfer portal. There's no doubt about that. And I've already heard that they feel really good about what they can bring in, because they have opportunity. There's no doubt about that. And also, this may not apply to big men, but their style of play, Konzo believes that how they have adapted and they play at a faster pace, it's a more attractive style. They've already getting good feedback from people out there that think that this will be a more desirable destination than it has been in the past. But we'll see. It's all about results.
Let's stay on that topic. Steve wants to know, 2 SEC coaches hired after Martin, Oates and Musselman, have experienced tremendous success. Missouri recruiting seems subpar. Does Stirk harbor any such thoughts?
I mean, look, Konzo is going to be the coach for 2 years, period. End of story. He's got 2 more years after this one, absolute minimum. So like I've been telling people for 3 months, if you want to pound your keyboard in frustration, you can, but he is going to be the coach for 2 more seasons. Nate Oates has done a hell of a job. SEC Coach of the Year, absolutely deserved it. Eric Musselman has done it the way everybody knew Eric Musselman would do it, largely, through the transfer portal. But those were the 2 best teams in the SEC this year, and they certainly deserve credit.
Let me jump in here. Is the only way they have a new coach then, Gabe, if Konzo decides to go somewhere?
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know if Dave feels differently, but I feel like there was about a 48-hour period where some random Twitter account made people think Miami was going to be that place, but I don't think Konzo's going anywhere this year.
First of all, I don't think there's many jobs right now that are open where he's really a hot name or that he would be interested in, frankly. And also, I know this from recent conversations. He likes the future. He likes what they're bringing in. And it's almost like a reset. You got these 5 freshmen or 5 seniors. He likes those guys a lot. They mean a lot. But sometimes just getting some new blood in can, if you're a head coach who knows he's got some security, that can be refreshing. And I get the sense that that's the feel for next year. And there's, he knows that he doesn't have to win the SEC next year to keep his job either. So, and he's also a guy that doesn't worry about that stuff. Gabe, you asked him a couple of weeks ago about just kind of job security type stuff. And, he's been doing this long enough. I don't think he worries about those things because I think he's got ambitions beyond coaching. He's not going to do this till he's 80 years old. And that stuff, I don't think it really bothers him or worries him too much.
And let's not forget, a couple of weeks ago, it came out that Jim Stirk was talking extension for Konzo.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see where that goes. Especially after the last 2 weeks. Look, I wouldn't have done it before the last 2 weeks. I don't think it's time. I don't think it's necessary. But the way it goes at Missouri is the second an athletic director mentions extension, that team goes in the tank. Like it is. I remember writing a story about Gary Pinkel getting an extension. I stopped in the Macon Public Library on the way to Iowa State, and that was the year Monte Wyrick got called for a phantom hold and Iowa State beat Missouri, right? I mean, look, if you're an AD, just keep the extension stuff to yourself, man, because it's not going to turn out well.
Well, there's no extension at KU, and Matt wants to know, who should KU hire as their next football coach?
Who wants a job?
Yeah.
I mean,
I think maybe they have to go interim.
Go ahead, Gabe.
No, I think maybe they have to go interim for a year, don't you? Like just promote somebody from within?
Maybe go interim forever. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's really up to Kansas at this point who they get. I mean, who wants that job unless they go interim?
I wonder if anybody thinks back to like 2009 and thinks, hey, maybe we shouldn't have fired Mark Mangino for yelling at kids.
Yep. Yeah. Those were the glory days, no doubt about it. Okay, when we come back, we'll talk about Missouri football and spring football. We actually got to see with our own eyes. We'll talk about that and more when we come back right here on Tiger Sidelines. Welcome back, everybody. Dave Matter, Gabe DeArmond, and I'm Bo Baiman. This is Tiger Sidelines. We got to see a little spring football this past weekend, buzzing right along through the spring. And recently we've had great weather. It looks like this weekend they'll probably have to move inside with all the rain. But it was just a practice. I hate to go overboard with this because we all just watched a practice. But did you like what you saw because you got to see something finally, Gabe?
Well, here's the here's the hard part about spring practice especially when you see limited. I mean, if you watch that one practice, you look and go, hey, I think Dominic Lovett and Mookie Cooper are good players, right? And I think they probably are good players. But we are literally talking about a fraction of 1 percentage point of the information a coach is going to have by the time they open the season in September. So like in the post-practice press conference or whatever, I kind of started thinking, oh my God, was Mookie Cooper the only player on the field here? How many Mookie Cooper stories are we going to read here? And what that leads to, like, when I've always said, like, we have to pull back when people get too excited and kind of pull them up when they get too down, right? Because now what that leads to is these expectations for a kid that, like, he's never played a college football game and he hasn't played in a year, and it's not even known if he's going to be able to play this year yet, right? So I mean, sure, there were some good things. I mean, for everything in practice that you think is really good, like, you can find a bad one too, right? If the offense did well, the defense was bad. Somebody asked about how good the wide receivers were, and Drinkwood said, well, I mean, we dropped 2 passes that turned into interceptions, so I'm not sure how good we were.
But it was finally good to actually be out there again. And I know for you guys, it's been a while, and that's a refreshing change, isn't it?
Yeah, I think since last spring when they had those 3 practices, and I'm not sure I was even out at all 3 because I think there was a basketball game in there somewhere. But
They were
sure,
supposed to be.
yeah, supposed to be, yeah. Just to see them in action. They're not full right now because they've got a couple guys that are nursing some injuries, some guys that are going to play a lot this year. Trey John, Jeff Coat, Jalen Knox, I would assume. But I'm with Gabe. You got to pump the brakes on anything you see out there. On the flip side is the one thing this team needed offensively is some playmakers, some receivers who can get separation and stretch the field. And what little we have seen, it does appear that that can be something that maybe Mookie Cooper and Dominic Lovett can do. So that could be the answer to a problem that this offense had last year. But you add another problem is they don't have a Larry Roundtree. So I'm really just curious to see how this running game works out. You can give the ball to Tyler Beatty and to Elijah Young and Dawson Downing, whoever else, as many times as you gave it to Larry, but they're not the same kind of player. So I'm just really curious to see how that develops between now and end of August, because they do have to play differently without that kind of running back.
Yeah, no doubt. Lots of new faces there. The number 17 softball team went 3-2 in Norman, Oklahoma. They beat Louisiana Monroe twice, beat Sam Houston State, but then played the number 1 Sooners twice and lost both. They lost 5-2 and 11-0. The Tigers still with a good start to the season, 15-4. And for me, Coach Anderson gets the glimpse into where her team has to go if she wants to be in the elite conversation, because Oklahoma, the first game, the 5-2 game was a good game. The 11-0 game, Oklahoma hit about 4 home runs against them. So that's kind of the measuring stick, and that's where she wants to be.
And the crazy thing was, right before that 11-0 game, they had won 20-0 by run rule. Like, I don't have the annals of college softball at hand here, but I would imagine a 31-run swing in one game has to be pretty close to a record.
I would imagine you're right. The Tigers will supposedly host their first home games this weekend. Drake, Kent State, and Iowa State scheduled to be here. It's a beautiful day early as we're taping this in the week, but it's supposed to be 2 to 5 inches of rain around Columbia this week. So we'll see if they get that in. Let's talk about the baseball team. Baseball went 0-4 this weekend. They lost twice to Dallas Baptist, who, again, we said there's really no shame in doing that. They lost to Oklahoma. They lost to Arizona. They're now 3-9, and they're struggling. The at-bats are not good. The bullpen is really, really full of holes, and that leads to 3-9, and they got a couple of games, and then SEC play starts. It's not going to get much better or much easier once you get into conference play.
Yeah, just looking at their innings when they're giving up these runs, it's not like a grand slam here, a couple home runs here or there. It's a lot of pass balls. It's a lot of just manufactured runs that the opponent is getting based on Missouri mistakes. I don't know if their errors are up way higher than they were last year, at this point in the season, but just not a very clean baseball team. They're leaving a lot of runners on base. The walks have been up there. They're striking out a lot offensively. I know their pitching staff isn't healthy yet. They don't have all of their arms out there, but man, they've had zero chance to get any momentum and carry it over to the next day. That was a tough trip down in Frisco, Texas.
And this is a team and a program that a couple of years ago, well, maybe 3 years ago now, really struggled in the non-conference, and it cost them an NCAA tournament bid when they did halfway decent in conference. I mean, they've dug themselves such a hole, Gabe, at 3-9 already. They got a game with SLU, and then they have Illinois State supposedly this weekend if they can get it in around the rain. But I mean, they got to start getting wins or this is over early.
Well, the bigger concern to me than the fact that you're 3-9 is these games aren't even competitive. Yeah. I mean, they really haven't been close. They got outscored 35-12 this weekend, so I don't even think you can start talking about wins. I think you just got to start talking about get to the seventh inning and give yourself a chance.
Yeah, no doubt. And I believe in that Oklahoma game, they were up 6-0 or 6-1 and lost 16-6. I mean, it's been that kind of time. And I know that Steve Beezer's got to be just wondering what's going on. Number 22 Gymnastics lost their regular season finale at LSU. They scored 196.175. The SEC championship comes up Saturday, March 20th. So that's the next time we'll see them. I know they got the last seed in the SEC, but still no shame in that. The wrestling team has another week before the NCAA tournament start in St. Louis. All 10 of the Tigers will be there for that. And volleyball travels to number 7 Florida for matches, and then that will be on Friday and Saturday this weekend. So there's a lot going on. I know that, if I'm not mistaken, soccer's even playing these days. So there's a lot of things that have carried over from the fall into the spring. Spring breaks coming up, so it's really March Madness around Mizzou, no doubt.
I will say, Bo, you buried the lead on gymnastics. They recorded the second highest balance beam score in team history last week. You don't get a banner for that, but they will have a quite.
I mean, why not? Why couldn't you get a banner for that?
They should.
Probably can't afford one right now.
Yeah, that's probably true. All right, hey, we're about out of time. Real quickly, as we tape this on Tuesday, your thoughts? Does Missouri beat Georgia in the SEC tournament, or are they one and done?
No, I mean, I think they'll beat Georgia. Missouri, they haven't even been in the quarterfinals of this thing for 4 or 5 years. They've never made the semifinals. I know fans would like to see them make a run. I will again say, just beat Georgia and get home and be allowed to play in the NCAA tournament. That's the only goal. Although, I don't know, maybe Dave wants to spend longer in Nashville.
Maybe not this year. Probably a more enjoyable place when there's not a pandemic going on. But I don't know. I haven't been to the South lately. Maybe there's not a pandemic in the South. I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure that they've canceled it, no doubt. All right, we'll talk about it next week. Thanks, as always, to Behind the Scenes Matt and Brian. For Gabe DeArmond and Dave Matter, I'm Bo Bayman. Thanks for watching Tiger Sidelines. We'll see you next week, everybody.